Tonight on Talking Politics, as a grand jury indicts former President Donald Trump, potentially complicating his hopes to retake the White House, one of his most high-profile nemeses has made it clear she doesn't plan on going anywhere. That would be Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's now officially running for a third term in the U.S. Senate. But recent polling suggests she might not be a lock for re-election. We'll dig into her strengths, weaknesses, and prospects later on. But first, Boston lost a titan this week. Community organizer and political trailblazer Mel King died Monday at the age of 94. And in the days since, it seems like the entire city has mourned the former state representative, history-making mayoral candidate, and lifelong activist who pushed back against racism and apartheid, mentored countless younger activists, and won hard-fought battles for affordable housing and against destructive development. Tributes to King have been pouring in from far and wide, but when I got a chance to talk to him at length a few years back, he balked when I asked about his legacy.
There's no such thing as Mel King's legacy. Mel King has never done anything on his own or alone.
But then he softened a bit on the legacy question, saying that he hopes people remember his very specific way of looking at the world.
It would be that a belief that it's possible to have a community and a world where all the tribes are welcome and all the gifts are shared. I believe that it's going to happen. So when we talk about the Rainbow Coalition, it was a way of saying all the tribes are welcome, and that mythical pot of gold would be where all our gifts would be shared.
The Rainbow Coalition was the diverse group of supporters who backed King in his campaign for mayor of Boston in 1983 when he became the first black candidate ever to make it to a general election in the city, but ultimately lost to his fellow former state representative, then a Boston City Councilor, Ray Flynn. Now, former Mayor Ray Flynn joins me along with the first black mayor of Boston, Kim Janey. She's now president and CEO of Economic Mobility Pathways. Thank you both for being here. Mayor Flynn, in 1983, when you and Mel King ran against each other, the city was divided over a court-ordered plan to desegregate Boston's public schools through the use of busing. And you too were divided on that. He supported the plan and you opposed it. But by all accounts, your campaign against each other managed to transcend that divide rather than exacerbating it. Why was that?
Well, actually, the busing took place before Mel King and I ran against each other.
Right.
So the city was divided, you're right, and polarized. But Mel King and I were friends because we played basketball together. We knew each other from the neighborhoods. I played a lot of sports in South End, Roxbury. I was the first white kid ever to play on an all-black basketball team, which Mel King played on as well. Jack Crump was the coach. So we had a special relationship. Mel King's father was a longshoreman. My father was a longshoreman. My wife Kathy's father was a longshoreman. And so immigrant families of longshoremen, hardworking people. My mother was a cleaning woman. So, you know, we had those bonds of friendship and commonality that we shared together. So long before we talked about politics, we had the same kind of family identity. And we loved talking about that. And people love listening to that. Even during the campaign, this would be like 10 years or whatever is after the busing, we'd be talking about roots and working class people and poor people, special needs kids. So it was a relationship formed out of respect and commonality, common ground. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I admired Mel King greatly, and we got along so well.
Mayor Janey, you volunteered for Mel King's run for mayor in 1983, as the button that you're wearing reminds us. As a young black woman at that moment in Boston's history, as Mayor Flynn mentioned, on the heels of busing dividing the city so sharply, what was it like being a part of that campaign?
You know, I grew up knowing Mel, knowing his entire family. My great grandmother had a house one street over from the Kings. And so our families have been intertwined and connected for generations. And so Mel was that person in our community who everyone knew. We knew he was a leader. We knew he was doing important work. I had a front row seat in terms of seeing his activism and his fight for quality education and for affordable housing. So to volunteer on his campaign to pass out flyers was a no-brainer at that time because he was one of our own and we believed in the issues that he was fighting. I want to point out, though, I was very young. I was still a teenager. Mm-hmm. I was one of those kids who was bused in the 70s. And so this is the aftermath of that. And I think many folks believed that Mel King's vision around connecting communities and bringing people together was one that our city needed in terms of healing. Mel King's genius is that his campaign was one that brought all walks of life together, very multiracial, intergenerational campaign. And so there was a lot of excitement for what this could mean for Boston. And when he made it to the final, obviously there was a lot of hope in that. And it was really good to see Mayor Flynn, and I certainly want to recognize you, Mayor Flynn. I'm sorry I can't be in studio with you, but to see Mayor Flynn and Mel King continue their relationship and work together to create better opportunities for the residents of Boston.
Mayor Flynn, you offered Mel King a position in your administration, right, after that election? Mm-hmm. And he took a pass. What was the role that you offered him, or was it more of a general?
Well, the election, Kim Janey is absolutely right. What brought the city together was the election. Mel King said to me the day after the election, we had coffee down in the South End, and early in the morning, I wanted to go over and talk to him right after the election. He said something like, well, I lost the election, Mel said. I said, Mel, you didn't lose the election. The people of the city of Boston won the election because they are the winners of this, because the campaign wasn't contentious. It wasn't polarizing. We spoke about the issues. We spoke clearly about them. He had some positions that I didn't agree with and vice versa. But at the same time, it was a campaign based on respect and mutual understanding, family values, community values, respect for the ethnicity and poor people. So I wanted somebody like Mel King to be at City Hall with me. And I says, Mel, we started this in the campaign, bringing the city together. Why don't you come down to City Hall? We can continue that. Well, he didn't want to. He wanted to do community outreach, and he did a great job in that regard. And he helped the city even more by the community outreach.
I want to ask you just quickly, and then we'll get back to you, Mayor Janey, about that community outreach that Mel King did. My sense is that, and when I interviewed him, again, a decade ago, he had very good things to say about your tenure as mayor. But I know that in the 80s, he was critical of you sometimes on, whether enough Boston residents were getting jobs on construction projects. Yeah. There was the push to have Boston's black neighborhoods secede and form a new community called Mandela, which he supported and you opposed. Was he, when he pressured you from the outside after you ran against each other, did he convince you or nudge you to do anything you might not have done otherwise?
Well, I wasn't in favor of separating the city and all that. I'm not sure Mel was, but it sounded good in the campaign.
And it made a point.
And it made a point. So I respected what he was doing. But I never really took it personally. I always felt that the city of Boston, all the people of the city of Boston, were in his best interest, just like even though I represented South Boston in the state legislature back in the early 1970s, when he represented the South End in the 1970s. We worked on issues of common ground. I used to say to Mel all the time, the issues that bring people together are far greater, far more important than those narrow issues that separate us. He said, I agree.
Yeah, that
And
seems like
that's
perfectly dovetailed with his worldview,
it's
right?
we have the same family background, the same philosophy, the same political goals, and it worked for both of us.
Mayor Janey, in the mayor's race a couple years ago, one of your campaign ads cast Mel King as the beginning of a political evolution in the city. I want to take a look at a little bit of the ad and then come back to you for some thoughts.
For our city, it's been a long time coming.
People have told me they're ready. They're ready for change. That unites us.
Our time has come. Our time has come when we are going to take the helm. We are going to lead. We're going to bring the city together.
At some point, we have to say, we need to give the women a chance.
Mayor Janey, I know this is speculative, but if Mel King had stayed in South Carolina after going to college down there, or if he had made his adult life in New York City or Philadelphia or somewhere else, how do you think Boston would be different today?
You know, I can't look back into a crystal ball to predict what Boston would have been like, but I am very clear that Boston is a better city because of Mel King, because of his advocacy, not just in the state legislature, because of his run, his historic run for mayor, but all of the work that he has done since then to engage communities, to bring communities together, to invest in our young people, and to lift up poor people in our city, and to ensure that we all have the opportunity to thrive in the city of Boston. There's no question in my mind that the leadership that we see, the fact that there was a Mayor Janey, that is in part because of Mel King, large part because of the doors that he opened up in this city. And so the fact that there's a Mayor Wu, again, those were the seeds that Mel King planted. And it really, I think there is a blueprint to be followed in terms of the relationship of Mayor Flynn and Mel King, and working together to ensure that our city does have that opportunity, that there is housing that people can afford to live in, that our schools are educating our children, that job opportunities and starting a small business are not insurmountable for certain communities. That is, I think, in part because of Mel King's legacy and his work, but also the relationship that these two gentlemen had and the care and commitment that they have to the city of Boston.
In that interview that I've referenced a couple times, we talked a little bit about then Mayor Tom Menino, and Mel King was rather critical of Mayor Menino. He, I think, believed he had not done enough to guarantee that people of modest means would be able to continue living in Boston long term. But when I asked him who he hoped would replace Menino, he essentially said, I want the people to be their own mayor. I want them to know that they can take control of their own destinies and they can make the city be what they believe it can and should be. And I'm wondering, we actually have sound from Mel King making that point. Let's take a listen.
Whoever's going to be the next mayor has to be pushed by the people to come up with what would make the city whole. And I'm convinced that, and I keep going back to this Messiah approach, that if people get in the street, talk to each other with a belief that we can make this community work for all of its neighbors, children, etc., that we can make that happen. And when you ask, who do we want to be the mayor? I want people to be their own mayor.
I'm wondering if each of you think that right now in Boston that there is that sense of agency on the part of the city's residents. Mayor Flynn, let's start with you, then we'll go to Mayor Janey.
You know, I always believed, and Mel did too as well, the politicians don't define the city. The people do. And Mel King and I were lucky, really lucky, because we came from the ranks of just average people. We weren't special. We had no money. We working class family, working class neighborhood. So we brought those values. Yeah, we're different color skin, but we brought those values from both sides of the bridge. the South Boston side, the South End side. We brought those values to City Hall. And you know, if you can do that, anybody can bring your personal values, even if a lot of people disagree with it. You do that, and you give an honest leadership. Everything in politics begins with honesty. If you're honest with yourself, if you're honest with the people, you're going to do a good job, even though you may not get reelected, even though people may disagree with you. That's the most important thing.
Mayor Janey, I think you are going to get the last word here. Do you believe that Bostonians have that sense of agency that Mel King said he hoped they would have?
I think they do more so than they ever have had in the past, particularly poor people in communities of color. The genius of Mel King is that he understood the principles of servant leadership. He embodied servant leadership, that this was not, as Mayor Flynn says, about any one particular politician or any one leader who would serve as that charismatic messiah, but that we had the power to save ourselves. And he believed deeply in the power of the people to save ourselves. And so he worked hard to ensure that our young people understood that, that people who had been outside on the margins understood that. And Boston is truly a better city because of his leadership. And that is the legacy that he leaves.
All right, Mayor Kim Janey, Mayor Ray Flynn, my condolences to both of you, and thank you for making time to reflect on Mel King's life.
God bless Mel King.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you.
Elizabeth Warren made it official this week. She's running for a third term in the U.S. Senate and giving herself an extremely ambitious to-do list if she gets it.
There's a lot more we've got to do. Pass a wealth tax, make child care affordable, protect our coastal communities, and build a 21st century transportation system across all of Massachusetts. Oh, and like I've been saying for years, put stricter rules on banks so they don't crash and hurt working people.
Of course, to get that third term, Warren also has to make it through the 2024 election. And based on some recent polling, a fair number of Massachusetts voters might not be as excited about her prospective re-election as she is. Case in point, a Mass Inc. polling group survey from late January and early February. It found that just 41% of Massachusetts residents viewed Warren favorably compared to 36% who viewed her unfavorably. And when it came to running again, the numbers were similar. 43% said she should and 36% said she shouldn't. So how tough a climb does Warren actually face, and could it include a challenge from inside her own party? Joining me to talk it through are Joan Vanacki, an associate editor and columnist at the Boston Globe and a member of the paper's editorial board, and Jesse Mermel, the president and founder of DeWitt Impact Group and a former Democratic congressional candidate. Thank you both for being here. Joan, did Elizabeth Warren's announcement come as a surprise for you, or did it confirm something that you'd expected for a while?
I don't think it was a surprise. I mean, there were some rumors and speculation that she might not run, but I'm pretty sure they were planted by people connected to people who want to be the next senator from Massachusetts. I think she chose a really good time to make the announcement. You know, she's got a bank collapse behind her, and now she's got Donald Trump to prosecute.
I hadn't, this shows how much more connected you are than me. I had not caught those rumors that were maybe being planted saying she wasn't going to run again. Had you been hearing those, Jesse?
Yeah, certainly had heard plenty of rumors that she was considering multiple different paths. But listen, if you want to understand what someone's thinking, maybe just listen to what they're saying. She's been saying consistently over and over and over again, I'm running for re-election. And lo and behold, she's running for re-election.
What do you make of the timing? Joan said, you know, she's got the bank collapse behind her, winded her sails in terms of policy. Do you have a similar read?
Yeah, I think it makes total sense. Obviously, it feels a little bit early. Normally, you might see something after the summer, but she's got a big agenda. She knows she has work to do, and she wants, I think, to squash those rumors of folks saying, oh, maybe she's not going to run again, or folks who might be thinking of challenging her. She wants to get out there. She wants to start raising money. She wants to be touching people all across the Commonwealth. I think it makes good sense, and I think the reaction to her announcement was incredibly positive.
And I think it was really interesting that Ayanna Pressley and Michelle Wu, who are both mentioned as potential Senate candidates at one point, are in that endorsement announcement. So that puts that to rest.
I noticed that too. And also in the endorsement announcement was Ed Markey, who, in addition to being a pretty good political communicator, I found his presence a reminder of the primary challenge that he beat back from Joe Kennedy a couple years ago.
And I thought it also positioned them really as a team, right?
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
presenting, we are your U.S. senators and we are working for you as a team in
Good point.
D.C. That's what it felt like to me.
Joan, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say he also represents longevity.
Yep, good point. I want to ask about those polling numbers that I've referenced and trying to, bring the usual media negativity at the start of the segment. But when you mentioned that these rumors talked about various pathways that Warren might be considering, what were some of these alternate options that people were convincing about?
Well, certainly as people consider whether or not President Biden is running for re-election, might she consider another presidential bid? There's inevitably going to be turnover in the cabinet. She was certainly talked about as a potential cabinet member at the beginning of the Biden term. Would there be a role for her there? That type of thing. Nothing terribly radical, Adam. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there was also sort of the thought or the talk that she might have a successor in mind, and that she would do something to sort of pass the torch to the person that she would prefer. I mean, I've heard, like everyone, that it could be Ayanna Pressley, but for sure, I mean, she's running again. Congresswoman Presley's in her announcement, so that was just typical political talk.
Okay, let's go back to the Massing poll that I mentioned a couple minutes ago. It found that Warren was weaker, relatively speaking, with less educated voters, with voters who live further away from Boston, and also with young voters. I saw the first two things coming, I think, but the third piece surprised me, maybe because I think of young voters as having been so key for Ed Markey when he beat Joe Kennedy, despite Joe Kennedy's relative youth, again, a couple years ago, and beat him very handily. Why might younger voters not have fully made up their mind about Elizabeth Warren yet?
I don't know. I found that piece surprising as well. It seemed like there'd be a natural connection. I think as she gets out there and tells her story, particularly around fighting for canceling student debt, she's been a national leader on that, not just a Massachusetts leader, that she'll find great support there. On that poll, I think it's important to note the numbers that you showed are about regardless of party. If you look at her numbers in the Democratic Party, where, let's be honest, it's Massachusetts, that's where the race is likely going to be, her numbers are very, very strong. So I think it paints a slightly different picture about what her vulnerability may or may not be.
That's a good point.
Could I throw out something on the age thing and Ed Markey? I think he pulled off a miracle that maybe only a man could pull off. He's now 76. He's been in Washington forever. He put on a pair of sneakers and got endorsed by AOC, and he was good to go with the kids. I'm not sure that any female politician of that vintage would get the same reaction.
That's a really interesting point to chew on. To your point about numbers that augur a little more positively for her, there was a poll conducted, I think, for Northwind Strategies by Change Research a little bit after the Massing poll, and it found similar splits in terms of favorable, unfavorable, but it also found that more of the people polled, I can't remember if it was voters or residents, felt very favorably about Warren than any other politician in the state, including Charlie Baker, which was striking because she's maybe divisive when it comes to the entire state, but the people who like her really, really, really like her.
And when you're heading into an election, or re-election in particular, you want to see that, right? You want to know that your folks aren't just going to go check the right box, but they're going to give you $25. They're going to go stand at the polling place. They're going to knock doors. They're going to talk to her friends. And there's no question that Elizabeth Warren has that incredibly strong, enthusiastic, and practiced base. That is a base of people who are used to working. They haven't been sitting around gathering dust, right? They know what they're doing, and they'll get to work for her.
So we've talked about the possibility of a primary challenge and how this announcement may be, among other things, an effort to keep one at bay. Do either of you think that she is going to end up getting a challenge, either from someone in the congressional delegation or maybe some other young, ambitious, maybe not so young, ambitious Democrat who decides to take a crack at her running from the right?
You want to go first?
Well, I believe she already has a third-party challenger. If I'm correct, someone
You're
announced
right. A libertarian
a few weeks ago.
Challenger, I believe. Yep. Whose name I should have front of mind.
I know. I apologize to them that I don't know their name. Listen, it wouldn't surprise me if someone from some party in some part of the spectrum in Massachusetts emerges.
But how about the Democratic Party?
I don't think she'll have at least a serious, credible contender in the Democratic
Joan,
Party.
do you agree?
Well, I think Jake Auchincloss has a bit of a lean and hungry look, but he says he's not going.
He says he's not doing
it, and I take him at his word. But you know what? I say if he wants to do it, he should. I mean, we now have seen, incumbents being challenged, whether it was Michael Capuano by Ayanna Pressley, Seth Moulton did it with John Tierney, Joe Kennedy tried it against Ed Markey, it didn't work, but, nobody owns their seat forever.
Another interesting point to ponder, I want to mention, our producer was kind enough to fill in my ignorance. It is Louis Marino.
Louis Marino,
who's running, who's already said that he's going to take on Elizabeth Warren. I want to ask you, before we wrap up, we've only got about a minute and a half left, what about the possibility of a solid Republican challenger? Amy Carnevale, the new chair of the Mass GOP, told me that she knows of at least 2 Republicans who are considering a run, that she's confident the party will be able to field a credible challenger. Last time Elizabeth Warren sought re-election, she ran against Jeff Deal, had similar poll numbers, and kind of wiped the floor with Deal. Is there anyone in the GOP, and Jesse, we'll start with you, then you get the last word, Joan, anyone in the GOP who you think could make her sweat?
Listen, I'm old enough to remember when we didn't sweat Scott Brown, and he wound up in the U.S. Senate and upending some really important votes. So I think we'd be fools in my party to sleep on anybody in the GOP right now, but they've got a tough road ahead. Obviously, they're coming off of a disastrous election in 2022. They're trying to sort of reconstitute their party and pick it up off of a deathbed. I think it would be really, really tough for the GOP to put up a credible candidate, but we cannot assume that's the case, and Elizabeth Warren has to be, and our party has to be ready and assuming there'll be a credible candidate.
Joan, sorry, I stopped on.
No,
say that last sentence again.
No, we have to be ready and assume that there's a credible candidate. I think that's tough for them to pull off, but we need to be ready.
You talked about intel that you were getting at the outside of the segment. Are you getting any intel on Republicans who might be doing this?
No, but to speak to that point, I guess it depends on the definition of credible. And I just don't really see, someone who could take her on. The most popular Republican in Massachusetts is Charlie Baker, and his own party despises him. And I just don't see Democrats embracing him. So I would say, yes, Scott Brown should be remembered. Democrats shouldn't forget that happened. But it's tough to see someone who could beat Elizabeth Warren.
I have no intel on this, but the only name that really comes to mind would be Karen Polito.
That's the one that I had in mind too, and I also
I'm
have
certainly
no
not
intel.
sitting here encouraging that. But
no, but that's a name to watch, I think.
Yeah.
All right, Jesse Mermel, Joan Vanacki, thank you both.
Thanks, Adam.
Finally, as we take a closer look at Governor Healey's political agenda over the coming weeks and months, we would like to hear what you think. Do her priorities line up with the issues that are top of mind for you? And what do you think she should be focusing on? Let us know at gbh.org/Healey-agenda. And please let us know how you think we're doing as well. The email is talkingpolitics@wgbh.org. The website is gbhnews.org/talkingpolitics, or you can find me on Twitter. I'm @Reilly Adam. For now, thank you for watching, and good night.